welcome now Sarah Brown. Now, Sarah is one of our stalwarts. She's a trustee, council member of Cardiovascular Care Partnership, a former midwife, but she's been a long-standing member with us, and she does all sorts of work, from BHF studies committees to the college, the BCS, and as part of her enthusiasm has also helped found the International Heart Spasms Alliance organisation too. And Sarah is talking about the the life on a tightrope, one woman's view of heart disease. Over to you, Sarah.
All right, thank you. So I have no conflicts of interest. Life on a tightrope. So I have lived for, it's now over 10 years, with unusual, often undiagnosed and overlooked heart condition. My coronary arteries go into transient spasms or constrictions, which means that I have a lack of blood supply to my heart, and when this happens I have experienced a lot of pain. Over the years I have learnt to manage and negotiate the triggers of this condition. However, it's still very unpredictable, and I will end up in hospital about once or twice a year for about 8 or 9 days to get my unruly vasospasms back under control. But what I want to say is that actually my story in some way starts with my husband. Because when he was in his late 40s, he said to me, "I've got a little bit of ache here. I feel a little bit lightheaded." So I said, well, I took a very reluctant husband to A&E, reminding him that his father had died in his late 50s of a heart attack. He was admitted. He had an angiogram. One of his coronary arteries was almost completely blocked, had a stent fitted, went home with all his secondary prevention, and at no time did anybody question that he might not have heart disease. About a year later, I started having chest pain. What did I do? I ignored it. At the time, I was very fit. I used to get on my bike and cycle 8 miles to work, get to the building where I worked, I did literally run up to the 3rd floor where I worked as a midwife in the birth unit, do a 12-hour shift, entice a baby or 2 into the world, get on my bike, ride home, and my journey included one of the steepest hills in North London. I couldn't possibly have heart disease. I ended up in hospital some time later with a suspected heart attack, and they could see how much pain I was in. I was given morphine. I was still having pain coming and going. So somebody thought I might have unstable angina, and they prescribed and they started an infusion of GTN nitrates, and my chest pain stopped. However, my angiogram showed that I had unobstructed coronary arteries, and I had a very confident cardiologist saying to me, "Mrs. Brown, you can't possibly have cardiac chest pain. Your coronary arteries are clear. It's not your heart." And they turned off the IV GTM. And then they watched, within about a minute or two, me have some quite dramatic episode of chest pain and my symptoms returning. And they looked at me and went, "Oh, that's not supposed to happen." And I'm going to now describe to you when I have a really severe episode of chest pain that sometimes do go into hospital, which take me into hospital. So my chest pain will start, and it will come in clusters of increasing intensity and severity of chest pain. And it will start here, and it will radiate round through to my back, and it feels as though somebody's got a cheese wire cutting round through the top of my chest. It goes up into my face, onto my shoulder, down into my arm. It feels as though somebody reaches inside my chest and takes my heart in their hands, and they are wringing it out as though they're wringing water out of a damp cloth. I feel lightheaded, I feel breathless, I feel sick. Somebody has put my chest in a vice and they squeeze all the air out and I can't breathe in. I get other symptoms associated with this, which is I get pain in my tummy, I get pain in my kidneys. I get an ice pick headache at the same time, and I'm very sensitive to light and sound. I feel very, very cold, and they will pile blankets on me and I'm still cold and I go completely pale. So they said, "Ooh, something is definitely going on with you. We don't know what's wrong with you, but we think we better send you to a specialist." So off I went to a specialist was a specialist in caring for people who had ongoing chest pain with unobstructed coronary arteries. And their approach was to treat by trial and error. We had a big list of medications, started at the top, worked the way down to the bottom. I didn't respond to my medication, and I still don't respond particularly well. I have as I say, life on a tightrope. I never quite know where I am with this condition. So at the end of this process, it was, rather than offering me further testing, it was, "Oh, Mrs. Brown, you've got an abnormal pain perception. You've got a sensitive heart, but you don't really have a heart condition. This condition of yours, I know it's a bit of a nuisance, but it's harmless." And I just looked him in the eye and said, "I'm sorry, I don't agree with you. This isn't harmless. This is not a sort of a nuisance of a condition," because he did describe it as a nuisance of a condition. I said, "This has had a profound effect on my life. I can't work anymore. I cannot function as a human being anymore. And I want to know why I'm having chest pain at rest that keeps waking me up at night. I want another referral, please." And I was sent to another cardiologist who, new cardiologist, new ideas. And I was offered testing with an angiogram where they would put a chemical into my coronary arteries and to see what would happen. And what happened was that I had a lot of chest pain, ECG changes. My pain was so severe, thank goodness for morphine. And this time I had a cardiologist who looked me in the eye and said, "It's no longer Sarah, Mrs. Brown, it was, Sarah, I know exactly why you're having your chest pain. Your coronary arteries are going into spasm." And I remember looking at him and saying, "So it's not in my head then?" He said, "No, it's not in your head. Your pain is real, and it's to do with myocardial ischemia." And I will never forget that conversation. That conversation is nearly 10 years ago. And I was so relieved that I knew what was causing my chest pain, that I wasn't going mad, because I really thought I was going mad. I felt vindicated, validated. My pain was real. I was right. It was my heart. And it gave me reason. I knew why I was having my symptoms, which meant that I felt able to start asking for the care that I needed to live as well as I can with my condition. So I asked for a care plan. And my care plan is to help the staff look after me when I go into hospital, because I have got some specific needs. And it's written very clearly that there should be no break in my IV-GTN infusion, otherwise I will experience really severe chest pain. Well, I've got my diagnosis. It's all written down on a nice piece of paper. I've got my care plan. It's all going to be all right then, isn't it? Well, unfortunately, it wasn't. And I faced some quite major challenges. I would go into hospital and one cardiologist looked at my care plan and said, "This isn't for me." And he did throw it across the room. He didn't think it applied to him. He then took his hand and placed it firmly here on my chest and saying to me, "Oh, it's musculoskeletal. This is rubbish about non-obstructive disease." I would have people telling me, disputing my angiogram results. They would tell me that I didn't need IV-GTN, I didn't need morphine. They would turn my IV infusion down too fast or just stop it abruptly, despite my protests. My care plan and my test results, my angiogram results, went unread and ignored. I was told my ECG changes were artifacts and that my troponin levels were not of clinical significance. I was also asked other questions like, "Surely your pain can't be that bad. Nobody needs that much IV-GTN for that length of time. And also, you don't look as though you're in pain. You don't need any more morphine." So what happened? I fell apart. I felt as though my whole sense of being had gone. I felt as though I was self-destructing from within. And I even started thinking, well, perhaps they're right and I'm wrong. And as a midwife, I couldn't understand why people didn't believe me. And they didn't understand why having coronary artery spasms or spasms in my blood vessels was causing me so much pain and distress. And these repeated experiences of my pain being ignored, or the cause of my pain being ignored, and all of this, it ultimately led to the fact that it broke down the trust I had in the people who were supposed to be caring for me. And also, which I found very sad as a former midwife, that happened. And I also now live with the extra burden of post-traumatic stress disorder because of this experience, which is another sadness for me and my family. So what is the way forward? It's not all doom and gloom. My care has started to improve. And why has it started to improve? Because of the research. And we're going to have a very interesting talk from VJ, and I have to thank the people who are doing the research. There's a raising of awareness about the condition. And also I do appreciate greatly the support that I have had from various healthcare professionals who listened. And they listened with compassion, and they listened with empathy, and they listened with an open mind, and most importantly, they believed me. But I keep asking, why was my husband treated differently to me? Is it because medicine uses the male body as a template for medicine and women become invisible? I think also that women use different words to describe what happens inside their bodies. As a midwife, a woman would come in, she wouldn't say to me, I've had a spontaneous rupture of my membranes. She'd say, my waters have gone. And I think women will say things like, my bra feels too tight, I've got spasms, I've got heart spasms. And that's why when I founded the International Heart Spasms Alliance with 3 other patients, we purposely chose the word heart spasms. We didn't want to use a medical term, because this is the term that people who live with microvascular and vasospastic angina use to describe the feelings that they have inside their body. Women do have chest pain too, but they may have other symptoms too. I've described you all the other symptoms I have. And it seems to be as soon as a woman starts talking about her other symptoms that it drowns out the chest pain. And the healthcare professionals' focus moves away from chest pain, and they start trying to translate all the other symptoms into other possible causes of the person's symptoms. So a heart attack becomes a panic attack. Angina becomes anxiety. So for me, what do we think about the final frontier? For me, it is, and there's an echo of what Rebecca said, is that it's for healthcare professionals to listen differently, to break through the barriers of bias and prejudice and assumptions that they have about women, and to believe that women really do have heart disease. That's a quick list of my resources and my contact details, but what I would like to leave you with is a visual image.
You might know a bit about coronary heart disease. You might know that it affects people of different ages and ethnicities, and that it's one of the UK's biggest killers. But you might not know that every year, over 23,000 of its victims
are women. Heart disease is her disease.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. Very moving and impactful, and I've taken the liberty of taking a slide of that wonderful falling apart slide, picture, if I may. Would anyone like to ask Sarah anything? We've just got 1 or 2 minutes before I welcome Vijay up. Michaela again. Of course, yes, yes.
Thank you, and thank you, Sarah. I think it doesn't matter how many times I hear your story, it still resonates really well, so thank you for sharing it. Do you know, is there any difference when women are presenting with whatever pains they are, particularly when it comes to chest pain? does women who are living with obesity get perceived even worse than actually women who are not living with obesity? So we know that when you do, if you're going with your knee problems, it's your weight. It's, you know, that. So do you know if there's any differences?
I don't know, but I don't know. Perhaps they might say they're breathless, they've got breathlessness, and that gets, in a way, the pregnancy masks the breathlessness, the obesity, which is what I was talking about, pushing through the barriers of bias and prejudice and assumptions. And the assumption is that they look at somebody, but they forget the person inside, and they forget to listen actively. So that's a prejudice, isn't it? To look, and just because somebody's overweight, that's their problem. And for me, it's a way, it's a judgment, and it's almost blaming the woman. You're breathless because you're overweight. Well, actually, you're breathless because you've got a heart condition.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. That's lovely, Sarah. Thank you.